Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of BTTH Rebirth of Emperor Yang episode number 27 based on novel. So let's start. I want you to die. When such bitter words were introduced into Xiaoyang's ears, Xiaoyang couldn't help laughing. On his face, there was a sense of disdain, which made Li Kang feel more and more angry. You think you are not even a mole ant? Why do you want me to die? Do you rely on the 8-star saint around you? It's ridiculous. Xiaoyang's sneer made Li Kang more and more angry, and he couldn't break Xiaoyang's body to pieces on the spot. But after all, with the confidence in his heart, he forced down the raging anger in his heart, and the eyes looking at Xiaoyang were replaced by an endless ferocious color. Li Kang's face was twisted, his face was ferocious, and his mouth was filled with a cruel and bloodthirsty sneer. His tone was very cold, and he smiled. Yes, you are a semi-emperor and supreme power. Naturally, I can't hurt you. However, I can't hurt you, but it doesn't mean that no one can press you. At the end of the voice, Li Kang's face had become crazy. It seemed that he saw the scene of Xiaoyang falling down in front of him, which looked ferocious and terrible. Suddenly, Li Kang suddenly poked out a palm-sized jade pendant, which also appeared in his palm out of thin air. Without the slightest hesitation, it seemed that he was afraid of being stopped by Xiaoyang in time. At the moment when the jade pendant appeared, Li Kang's palm also shook it suddenly. The jade pendant burst into a dust mist and scattered in the air. A little stone powder also slipped down Li Kang's fingers. When the jade pendant burst, a circle of invisible energy quickly spread from the explosion to the whole world. Although Xiaoyang took all of what Li Kang had done into his eyes, he didn't worry at all. Instead, a sense of banter surged in his heart. It's just 6 stars and a half emperors, just like Xiaoyang today. Since Li Kang is shameless and eager to prove himself, Xiaoyang doesn't mind giving him a slap to wake him up. However, at the moment, Li Kang seems not to see the joking smile hanging around Xiaoyang's mouth. Instead, he stares at Xiaoyang with a successful cold eye, quietly waiting in place, waiting for Xiaoyang's death. At the moment of the special energy diffusion, in the wild ancient city and somewhere in the secret room, a pair of sharp eyes also opened suddenly and swept their eyes to the area where Li Kang was located. His eyes showed the meaning of killing. The jade pendant was made by him and handed over to his grandchildren. He had already warned that it must not be used easily unless it is a great difficulty in life and death. Now it seems that his frustrated grandson may have provoked someone again, but since he used the jade pendant, I'm afraid this time will not be a small thing. A cold hum came from his nose, and the figure in the secret room disappeared at this moment. In the next moment, an old figure appeared in the sky of the wild ancient city, and an unparalleled powerful momentum swept out in an instant and spread between the heaven and the earth. When this momentum swept away, many people found the presence of this figure in the wild ancient city. Suddenly, the crowd in the wild ancient city was boiling like a pot. In this wild ancient city, I'm afraid few people don't know his existence. Even if there were people who didn't know before, they should know his identity instantly under the reminder of the people around them. The old man in the sky is the ancestor of the Li family, the first family in the wild ancient city. With the horror of strength, he has stepped into the supreme position of half-emperor, and he is also a real 6-star and half-emperor. In this wild ancient city, except for the cloud-hidden pavilion, no force can compete with it. It can be said that it is the real overlord-level terror on the surface of this wild ancient city. However, now, it is such an ordinary and unimaginable terrorist existence, but at this moment, it appears in front of them out of thin air. How can it not make them excited? However, at the moment, it seems that the mood of the Li family ancestor is not very good. People who can be in this wild ancient city are all good people. They can easily detect anything wrong. At the moment, the breath of the Li family's ancestor is obviously not very friendly, and this is enough for everyone below to take it seriously, without the slightest relaxation of vigilance. The next moment, the ancestor of the Li family seemed to have found something. When he moved, he disappeared into the void again, and his figure reappeared outside the small courtyard. The ancestor of the Li family first frowned before he could see who was in front of him. With his familiarity with the wild ancient city, this is Luo Laro's place. How can he treat him carelessly when he is here? But then, his eyes turned to Li Kang on one side, saw his broken clothes and robes, and then looked at the 8-star saint who was also embarrassed, and his face became ugly. Under his exploration, Li Kang seems to have a serious internal injury in his body. If he is not careful, it is a small matter to hurt his muscles and bones, but if he leaves any sequelae, he can't tolerate it. Immediately, he followed Li Kang's eyes and looked at the man who hurt his grandson. But at the end of his eyes, he found that this man was Xiaoyang he had just seen before, and his face became as gloomy as water in an instant. After a good film, he looked at Xiaoyang, narrowed his eyes slightly, stared at Xiaoyang, and said softly, "My friend, I'm Li Gan. I think I've heard of my name in this wild ancient city. If my grandson does something wrong, I'll bring it back to punish him. But now, you're doing a good job on my grandson. Don't you think it's beneath your dignity to bully a semi-holy boy as the supreme emperor of the hall and half-emperor?" For Li Gan's words, Xiaoyang also listened to his eyebrows and was quite unhappy. The hurt on Li Kang's body also depended on his Xiaoyang's head, but in a flash, Xiaoyang also understood that Li Kang was very angry with himself. Naturally, if he could frame him, he would frame him, and Li Gan would certainly dare not do anything to Luo Lao. Therefore, no matter what, this crime will inevitably fall on him. Naturally, there is no need to say more nonsense. If he recognizes it, he will recognize it. The big deal is a war. Li Gan obviously saw Xiaoyang's thoughts, and he was suspicious. With Xiaoyang's own strength, he doesn't think Xiaoyang can fight with him, but the look Xiaoyang shows at the moment doesn't seem to have a false meaning. Is there really any means for the man in front of him? Thinking of this, Li Gan's eyes looking at Xiaoyang could not help narrowing into a thin line again. After a long time, his slightly overbearing voice came out again. "Well, I think you're young. It's hard one to have such accomplishments. Today, my grandson's suffering is regarded as his experience." Li Gan's sudden soft words also made Xiaoyang look a little stunned. Then he looked at Li Gan suspiciously. Sure enough, Li Gan immediately said, "Of course, after all, my grandson was also injured by your excellency. I'm afraid this injury will leave sequelae. I'm worried. Therefore, if you can make an apology to my grandson, I can think that this has never happened today." At the end of the voice, Li Gan's body also quietly diffused a powerful and unparalleled terrorist momentum, which made the space around him slightly distorted. Xiaoyang's face changed in an instant. He could clearly feel that at this moment, there was an extremely terrible momentum, and the pressure shrouded in the space around him, so that his body could not help sinking a little. Hum. With a cold hum, Xiaoyang's body suddenly shook. The terrible momentum surrounding Xiaoyang also retreated like a tide in an instant, and Xiaoyang's face became as gloomy as water. "Make an apology? What do you rely on? Do you rely on your 6-star and half-emperor?" With Xiaoyang's words, Li Gan's face became ugly in an instant. He was ridiculed by a small 3-star emperor. How can he not be angry with such humiliation? "Boy, you really talk big. Since you don't pay attention to me like this, let me see where you come from." Before the words fell, Li Gan was already a body riot and bombarded Xiaoyang. A big war was imminent. You are arrogant. Since you propose a toast and don't take a penalty, you can't blame me for being cruel." As soon as the voice fell, Li Gan's body also rose from the ground with a roar, and once again ascended the 10,000 feet above the sky. A pair of cloudy old eyes were also facing Xiaoyang from a distance. Where his eyes met, the space could not help a burst of agitation. "Boy, how dare you fight me?" Li Gan looked down at Xiaoyang in Xiaofang City and said slowly. However, although the words seemed to be asking questions, there was a sense of hegemony in the tone. Today's Xiaoyang first hurt his grandson, but also didn't pay attention to his 6-star and half-emperor. It can be said that he lost all his face. Therefore, in any case, he will let the boy pay more to heal the wounds in his grandson's heart and calm his anger. When Xiaoyang saw this scene, the corners of his mouth aroused a sneer. When he looked at Li Gan's eyes, he also showed a sarcastic color. "Do you want to lend me authority in front of everyone in the city? Oh, in that case, I'm not polite." A thought flashed in his heart, and Xiaoyang also flashed in his body. He suddenly appeared in the opposite of Li Gan, occupying one side of the sky with Li Gan. When these two people appeared in the sky, the endless stream of people in the wild ancient city also stopped and looked up again at this moment. When everyone saw Li Gan, they all looked surprised. Li Gan's breath was out at the moment. Look who he was going to fight with. When people turned their eyes to Xiaoyang opposite him, they were again shocked by Xiaoyang's youth. Li dares to start with such a hairy boy. But these people are not stupid. They naturally know Li Gan's strength. Since the young man can stand side by side with him, his strength will not be weaker than Li Gan. This son is also a semi-emperor supreme power. At the thought of this, there will be a riot in the crowd below. It's really rare to see a semi-imperial strong at such an age. Of course, among the crowd, there are many people who stopped a robbery in the Union Pavilion that day and took the opportunity to see Xiaoyang. At the moment, they recognized that this person was the one yesterday, and a burst of exclamation came from all over the place, and the crowd that has not subsided is also a sensation again. Just by himself, he was able to force several semi-emperors to protect the Dharma. This kind of power is really against the sky. No wonder he was able to stand side by side with the ancestors of the Li family. However, if these people know the real reason for protecting the law, I'm afraid they can't help but make a burst of funny word. Xiaoyang and Li Gan ignored the sensation and scream of the crowd below, and their eyes were opposite and silent. Suddenly, a sharp light flashed through Li Gan's dark old eyes, and then his whole body momentum swept out like a sea tide, turned into a towering Mount Tai, and suddenly pressed down on Xiaoyang. He wanted to use his momentum to force Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang also gave a cold hum in his nose. The power of different fire suddenly broke out in the cyclone in his body, and a hot flame breath swept away from Xiaoyang's body. The terrible flame breath, with the terrible pressure of burning the sky, invisibly turned into a giant ruler. When the giant ruler was waved, it was blasted towards the towering Mount Tai. A dull bang came from the void. Li Gan's wrinkled old face became a little solemn at this moment. Xiaoyang's momentum made him feel strange. With his white momentum, he had an unparalleled power of fire. Even this world was affected by his momentum, and Li Gan's dark loss was eating here. Xiaoyang looked at Li Gan with a light face, as if everything had nothing to do with him, which made Li Gan feel ashamed in his heart and wanted to kill Xiaoyang. The muscles in the corners of his eyes twitched. Li Gan narrowed his eyes and stared at Xiaoyang. A moment later, a cold hum came out from his nose again. With a wave of his big sleeve, the light flashed in his wide palm, and then a wide gold knife appeared in his palm. With a wave of his arm, the broad gold knife crossed the sky with the great power of tearing the void, and then stood obliquely on the right side of Li Gan's body, as if fixed in the void. Boy is a little capable. I don't know if I can take this knife again. Before the voice fell, Li Ganyu suddenly waved his arm. The broad golden knife also tore the void in an instant. Bursts of sonic booms made the faces of everyone in the square city change in an instant at the moment, and there was a buzzing sound in his mind. The strong wind of Ling Lai swept away, blowing Xiaoyang's clothes and robes tightly attached to his body surface, but his bright eyes stared at the golden knife in Li Gan's hand, and his eyes were never old. Drink. Let's try my knife. I'm angry. Cut the tide. Before the words fell, an overwhelming wave of fighting spirit suddenly shot out from the tip of the golden knife, wrapped with the power of heaven and earth, swept towards Xiaoyang, and there was a drizzle between heaven and earth. Li Gan's fighting skill at the moment is so powerful that he can use his momentum to trigger the visions of heaven and earth. Such momentum is really terrible. However, in Xiaoyang's eyes, all this is still far from enough. It's just Tianjie fighting skill. He thinks that with his power of different fire, one blow is enough to completely destroy it. With a wave of the big sleeve, the different fire in the body surged wildly at the moment until the palm. The extremely hot different fire turned into a flaming dragon, which gushed out of Xiaoyang's palm in an instant. The gorgeous flame condenses and changes rapidly. In just a moment, it has turned into a huge flame ruler emitting terrible high temperature. For a moment, the drizzle that was still falling between heaven and earth suddenly disappeared. On the contrary, it was an unbearable dryness that burned everyone's body. The water in the air seems to have been forcibly taken away by the giant ruler in an instant. Even breathing becomes as unbearable as human torture at the moment. Xiaoyang, standing in the sky, stared at the fighting wave until a moment, a bright fire burst out in Xiaoyang's eyes, and the huge ruler in his hand was also waved in an instant. At the moment when the giant ruler was wielded, the sky was smashed and the endless high temperature. Even the void was unbearable. The power of different fire was really terrible, and the power of burning the sky was not empty. A foot suddenly swept across the sky, and a gorgeous foot-orn with a width of 100 feet suddenly shot away towards the fighting wave. In just a moment, the distance between the two has been rapidly narrowed, leaving only a short distance of Zhongshu. The next moment, these two powerful terrorist fighting skills finally came into contact with each other under the eyes of tens of thousands of people in the city. Boom! A thunderous roar suddenly rang through the sky above the wild ancient city, followed by a circle of terrible fighting storm, which suddenly swept away from the place where the fighting skills exploded. Where the storm passed, the heaven and earth shook and the void was broken. The heaven and earth they set up turned into a dark, deep and endless void. At present, When people in the square city see this scene, their faces change greatly. If the storm sweeps away, I'm afraid that today, the wild ancient city will completely disappear in history, and they will certainly be the funerary objects of this history. Just when everyone turned pale and had no choice but to wait for death, there were suddenly more than a dozen fighting lights of different colors in all directions of the wild ancient city, and they stopped on the void in an instant. Among the more than 10 splendors, it is the semi-imperialist strong who came into contact with Xiaoyang yesterday, and among them, an old man with the most brilliance is particularly eye-catching. And he is the Xianlao of Union Pavilion. These more than 10 figures all raised their eyes and looked at the terrible collision above the sky, and their thoughts were constantly surging in their hearts. The old man who met Xiaoyang yesterday also showed a dignified color in his eyes looking at Xiaoyang. Even in the depths of his eyes, there was a little sense of fear. The old man thought he didn't have that kind of strength when he collided with Li Gan, but looking at Xiaoyang with a light face at the moment, he was not sure of taking over the startling blow just now. Although they are both 3 stars and half emperors, the gap between him and Xiaoyang is very different. If he is allowed to fight with Xiaoyang, he dares to believe that he will have no chance of winning. With a helpless sigh, the old man smiled bitterly and shook his head. Then a fighting glory appeared over his head, spreading like a water wave, which summarized the sky. At this time, all the other semi-imperial strongmen around the old man were like this. The ripples of fighting spirit with different colors spread rapidly, covering the whole wild ancient city and its miles. And the terrible fighting storm finally stopped before the fighting barrier, and the people in the city were safe. When the storm dispersed, Xiaoyang still looked like a light cloud and wind. He grabbed a plain smile at the corners of his mouth and looked at Li Gan with a smile. Today, these 2 people met each other. Unexpectedly, they were equal. I think there will be another war in the future. Li Gan was even more annoyed by Xiaoyang's appearance, and his heart was very painful. Today, he is a 6-star and a half emperor, but he is still a hairy boy with only 3-star and a half emperors. How can he bear it in his heart? Bastard. I still don't believe it. I'm a 6-star and half emperor, and I can't deal with you. I really think the strength gap between the strong and half emperors is so easy to make up. Today, I'm going to cripple you first, and then torture you. Die for me. After some bitter words, Li Gan also waved his big sleeve with a distorted face, held the wide gold knife in his right hand, and his body suddenly flashed, which was to chop and kill Xiaoyang again. Die. Li Gan's voice did not fall, but his body shape was already a flash. He came to Xiaoyang's side, and the broad gold knife in his hand fiercely cleaved down towards Xiaoyang. The fierce fighting spirit in the body quickly covered the gold knife in his hand, which made the power of the gold knife more fierce, and the golden light on it was more bright. After being irradiated by the sun, the gold knife was like a round of hot sun falling on Xiaoyang's head. The strong wind made the hair on Xiaoyang's head separate towards both sides. Xiaoyang's scalp felt a stabbing pain like a needle, which made Xiaoyang frown slightly. Xiaoyang doesn't dare to be careless about this. Although he is confident that he has the ability to fight with the 6-star and half emperor, he has to weigh 1 or 2 for such a rapid bombardment. Otherwise, he has encountered a lot of capsizing in the gutter. In the cyclone in Xiaoyang's body, the fighting spirit ran to his lower body at a high speed. Then Xiaoyang moved under his feet and the Tianjua step opened instantly. Drink. Kill me. When the knife fell, Xiaoyang's body was cut twice by the sharp golden knife. Everyone in the Xiaofang city was shocked. But the next moment, it was another moment that attracted a roar of laughter in the city. When the golden knife passed by, Xiaoyang's body was also torn in an instant, and then dissipated in this void. Li Gan's face finally became as gloomy as water at the moment, and there was endless killing intention in his eyes, almost surging. What Li Gan killed with the golden knife in his hand was just a remnant of Xiaoyang, but even so, he still bombarded with such force. He thought Xiaoyang was the real body and such eyesight, but he really lived on the dog. Compared with the laughter of the people in Xiaofang City, the complexion of the more than 10.5 powerful emperors turned into a dignified at this moment. Xiaoyang's body method is so fast that even they can't find it. When Xiaoyang left just now, they didn't see the slightest. Such a speed is really terrible. The Xianlao, who stood in the sky, looked at the residual shadow of Xiaoyang, but his face was different from others, but showed a look of surprise. Xuanlao's eyes narrowed slightly, staring at a void space above the sky, where it seemed that there was something. Tut tut, I can't imagine that the 4 major gates have fallen into the hands of the rock owl after 100 years of fruitless pursuit. Hey, no wonder you can have the capital to compete with the 8-star and half emperor. It's really not a false reputation to take a step this day. Look at this, I'm afraid it's only a period of time for the rock owl to get it. It can explode such a terrible speed. If you really succeed in cultivation, you really don't know how terrible it will be. When Xianlao was staring at the void, it seemed that there were a pair of eyes opposite Xuanlao's 4 eyes. After a moment of surprise, the two people were tacit and didn't move anymore. Drink. Suddenly, there was a startling cry behind Li Gan. A huge fist with dazzling golden light also suddenly appeared from the space behind Li Gan. One punch was smashed at Li Gan's vest. Li Gan was also shocked by the sudden blow, but after all, he was also an experienced man. After a moment, the fear on his face was swept away. The body shape was strong and turned around. It looked very strange for a moment. The fighting spirit in the body was shocked. Then it quickly gathered on the palm of the hand like a spring. When the palm hit out, it was hard to bang with Xiaoyang's fist. With a bang, Li Gan's body suddenly trembled. Unexpectedly, Xiaoyang's strength would be so huge, and his body could not live. He stepped back slightly. But a moment later, Li Gan suddenly waved the golden knife in his other hand and cut it off with a knife towards the golden fist. Rush thunder to cut. A knife fell, but there was a terrible thunder with it. Before the knife arrived, the thunder came first, and the blow was already hard on the huge fist. Suddenly, Xiaoyang couldn't help feeling a numbness in his arm. Even the golden light on the golden giant fist was slightly dimmed. When Li Gan saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel a little happy. His heart moved. Another 100 feet of thunder, which was thicker than before, fell in an instant, and hit the golden giant fist again. Hiss. A slight hissing sound came out quietly. The 100-jong thunder that had just bombarded Xiaoyang's golden fist disappeared suddenly as if it had fallen into an endless abyss. Li Gan's offensive was shocked by the strange scene for a moment, but Xiaoyang just used this moment to completely eliminate the numbness on his arm. A cold hum was sent out, and Xiaoyang's fist suddenly attacked again. The huge fist passed, and the nothingness was broken. Even the space that was nothingness was sending out a crisp sound again at this moment. Grade 8 collapse. Drink. Bang. A sound of body collision suddenly came out. Li Gan's body also flew backward in an instant. At the same time, Li Gan's body also heard several sounds of bone fracture. Under this fist, Li Gan's bones were forcibly broken, which is enough to show the power contained in Xiaoyang's fist. Burst. A sonorous and powerful voice suddenly came out again from Xiaoyang's mouth. I only heard that Li Gan flew out upside down, and his body turned again uncontrollably in the air. Then he retreated to thousands of miles before spitting blood and stopping his body. When he looked at Xiaoyang, he was also surprised. What happened to that blow just now? When Xiaoyang blew Li Gan back, he slowly showed his body from the void, but he smiled in his heart and said, "Little fellow, after sleeping for so long, did you finally wake up? Hehe, but look at this, you get a lot of benefits from the power of space. Your strength has not only fully recovered, but also reached the peak of the 8-star saint. Hehe, it can be regarded as an unexpected joy." At the moment, what Xiaoyang said is naturally Xiao Jin who has already fallen asleep. Unexpectedly, Xiao Jin will wake up at that critical moment, which also saves Xiaoyang a lot of trouble. At the moment, in Xiaoyang's body, a thunder dragon glittering with golden thunder is also turning and dancing in Xiaoyang's body, looking quite happy. The silver-white space power flickering around him also makes the little guy more amazing. After talking to Xiao Jin casually, Xiaoyang took back his mind again and set his eyes on Li Gan thousands of miles away. Although Xiaoyang hit him in the middle with one punch, Li Gan also has the strength of 6-star and half-emperor after all. That bombardment is only skin injury at most. Even if there is an internal injury, it is not a heavy injury. It is really nothing compared with people at their level. Drink. A roar mixed with blood suddenly came out again from Li Gan's mouth. At the moment, Li Gan has really entered a violent state. Today's humiliation is the most unbearable one in his history. Therefore, Xiaoyang today has been included in the ranks of the people who must die in his heart. The body shape flashed again, and Li Gan's body shape instantly disappeared in this void space, as if it had never appeared. At the same time, the void space in front of Xiaoyang was broken again. A sharp golden knife also instantly attacked the distance of thousands of miles, appeared in front of Xiaoyang, and a knife fell to Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang was also unwilling to show weakness. He showed a sneer on his face. The different fire in his palm appeared again. During the rapid condensation, Xiaoyang waved his big sleeve and hit the golden knife with one foot. Just for a moment, the The two had already made 100 moves, and there was damage between them. But if you look carefully, you can find that Li Gan's clothes are broken, his body surface is blue and purple, and even a large area of skin burned by the fire. The whole person looks as if he had been baked in the fire. Compared with Li Gan, although Xiaoyang's clothes are slightly broken, it is obvious that Li Gan's attack only hurt Xiaoyang's clothes. Xiaoyang, who has Chanjueben's protection, tries his best to avoid all Li Gan's attacks. At the moment, Li Gan also felt more and more angry. He was a 6-star-and-a-half emperor, but he was hurt like this by a 3-star-and-a-half emperor. How can he be reconciled? But at this moment, his heart also seems quite helpless. Xiaoyang's body method is fast, which he can't catch up with. I'm afraid it's just as fast as the 8-star-and-a-half emperor's full exertion. Unfortunately, Li Gan is still thinking about how to deal with Xiaoyang, but Xiaoyang has no patience to continue. Today's World War I, Xiaoyang just wants to predict his strength. Fighting with the 6-star-and-a-half emperor can already make himself invincible. Therefore, there is no need to continue playing. Xiaoyang's figure suddenly retreated thousands of miles when his body moved. The fire in his eyes surged. With a wave of his big sleeve, the turbulent different fire swept out in an instant. The printing formula in his palm changed rapidly. Look at this printing formula, it is Xiaoyang's second famous fighting skill, Buddha Anger Reincarnation. On the boundless sky of the ancient city, two figures stand out of thin air. At the moment, one of the men looks quite young, but his momentum is surging. Lingtian's fighting spirit surges out of himself and gathers between his palms. With the continuous gathering of fighting qi in his body, between heaven and earth, the energy of heaven and earth visible to the naked eye is also manifest from the void, turned into a wave of energy torrent, and poured into the palm of the man. The flaming flame that can burn the sky, like a sea tide, swept from its body and covered the sky. Between heaven and earth, it became dry and hot at this moment. At this moment, if you look up from the ground, the whole sky seems to turn into an endless sea of fire at this moment, which makes people look like a sense of dryness and heat. The semi-imperialist strong are really so terrible. Such a powerful fighting skill is really the most terrible they have ever seen in their life. On the horizon, Li Gan also had some changes in his look at Xiaoyang. Obviously, even he could not help raising some worries about Xiaoyang's fighting skills at the moment. Just the initial display of fighting skills can attract such power. We really can't know what a terrible scene it will be when the fighting skills are completely condensed. Li Gan stared at the changes between Xiaoyang's palms. Vaguely, he also saw that there was a mysterious black light spot the size of a thumb in Xiaoyang's palm, and those terrible heaven and earth energy and Xiaoyang's fighting spirit were swallowed up by the black light spot. The mysterious black light spot, however, seems to be a bottomless hole. Recognizing how terrible the energy is, it devours it all into it. At this scene, Li Gan's hair suddenly stood up, and he felt a burst of danger in his heart. If he really allowed Xiaoyang to continue like this, he might not even have the chance to escape. Now, if he wants to defeat Xiaoyang, first of all, he must forcibly interrupt Xiaoyang's fighting skills at the moment. Otherwise, he can't bear the consequences. With this in mind, Li Gan's eyes suddenly took on a violent color. With a sudden wave of the broad gold knife in his hand and a move of his body, he rushed towards Xiaoyang again. 1,000 miles away, he flashed in an instant. The next moment, Li dared to do his best, but it was already on Xiaoyang's head, only an inch away from Xiaoyang's scalp. Xiaoyang can even clearly feel the sharpness on the golden knife. If this knife really falls, I'm afraid Xiaoyang will be divided into two halves on the spot. Xiaoyang's eyes narrowed slightly into a thin line, and his face looked colder and colder. Have you started to try the last struggle? Unfortunately, everything you have done is useless. I said at the beginning that as long as you don't provoke me, I won't bother to pay attention to you. Now this situation is just what you ask for. If you want to blame your stupid grandson. A thought flashed in Xiaoyang's heart, but the figure standing in the void suddenly flashed, and then Wu disappeared in the sky. At the same time, thousands of miles away, somewhere under a burst of distortion, Xiaoyang's body reappeared, and the printed formula in his hand was also changing rapidly, which was not affected by Li Gan at all. Li Gan's powerful blow also failed again. Xiaoyang's body method is not comparable to that of the 6-star-and-a-half emperor. Today, I'm afraid he can only watch Xiaoyang and completely condense his fighting skills. At that time, I'm afraid it's the time of his death. At the thought of this, even though Li Gan is an old guy who has lived for many years, he still has a strong sense of fear in his heart. But the next moment, on his face, which was like a dead grey, there was a sneer, and the smile at the corners of his mouth made people look disgusting. Li Gan also slowly put away the golden knife in his hand, as if Xiaoyang's fighting skills had nothing to do with him. He stood upright on the void and looked at Xiaoyang with a sneer. After a long time, Li Gan sneered at Xiaoyang. "Your Excellency, do you really want to forcibly kill me in this wild ancient city today?" Hearing this, Xiaoyang frowned slightly and showed a suspicious color on his face. Li Gan's action was naturally included in Xiaoyang's eyes, but it also made Xiaoyang's heart slowly lift up. After a pause, Xiaoyang replied coldly to Li Gan. "I can't blame all this. If you don't provoke me, I won't bother to move you. It's a pity that your grandson is really not enough grandson. He just wants you to move me." As soon as Xiaoyang said this, all the people in the lower city couldn't help laughing. They were stimulated by Xiaoyang's words. However, the semi-imperial strong men in the sky looked more and more dignified at the moment, and looked at Xiaoyang with great fear. Not because of Xiaoyang's ridiculous words, but because of the gorgeous flame disk filled with the power of terrible flame in Xiaoyang's hand at the moment. At first glance, the disk is not so good, but the terrible power of fire, even in the endless void, still makes the dark world very hot. The people in the city are guarded by them. They can't clearly feel it, but how powerful they are, and how can they know the horror of the flame? When even a few of the semi-imperialist strong men said in surprise, "What kind of heaven and earth divine fire is the flame? Is it the heaven and earth different fire on the different fire list? Otherwise, how can you have such a terrible flame power?" "I don't think so. If it's a different fire, how can the color be so chaotic? I'm afraid it's some kind of animal fire we don't know well." When Shenlaro looked at Xiaoyang, he couldn't help but have a dignified look in his eyes. Luo Jin had already told him that Xiaoyang was powerful, but at that time, it was just Luo Jin's words. He couldn't believe it completely. There was still some doubt about Xiaoyang's real combat power in his heart. Even when I saw Xiaoyang's Chenjue step before, I just guessed that Xiaoyang could deal with the 8-star and half-emperor. But from now on, it is not impossible for Xiao Yanruo to really want to forcibly kill an 8-star and a half-emperor strong man. However, with the flame disc in Xiaoyang's hand at the moment, Shenlaro can recognize that the level of this fighting skill is probably the existence of human-level fighting skills. Even if he is right, he must be careful. How terrible the human-level fighting skills are, it is absolutely no stranger to Shenlaro, an old man from the middle regions. Now, the Buddha anger reincarnation in Xiaoyang's hand is coming to an end, and Xiaoyang's face is a little white at the moment. Obviously, Xiaoyang is really concentrating with all his strength in the exertion of this Buddha anger reincarnation, and the power of this Buddha anger reincarnation will be the most powerful one since Xiaoyang created it. Boy, even if you can forcibly kill me, can you conclude that tens of thousands of people in this wild ancient city can really live? Suddenly, Li Gan's slightly hoarse voice came out again, which made everyone present turn their eyes. After hearing Li Gan's words, everyone in the city changed slightly. Obviously, they already knew the horror of the disc in Xiaoyang's hand. Since Xiaoyang's fighting skill can forcibly kill Li Gan, the 6-star and half-emperor, let alone their ordinary strong ones. On the horizon, after hearing the speech, the 10.5 strong emperors all made a cold hum, which was obviously dissatisfied with Li Gan's contempt for their strength. After hearing this, Li Gan once again sneered at the corners of his mouth, and then opened his mouth and said with a laugh, Yes, I almost forgot that with the protection of all semi-emperors and strong men, the boy's blow can't hurt the people in the city." When these words came out, Li Gan suddenly became crazy, sneered and said again, "Therefore, I have only one way to die. In that case, I will die. I must take this boy to bury me." As soon as Li Gan said this, all the people in the city looked suspicious, but the 10.5 strong emperors in the sky all twitched violently under this remark, and the eyes looking at Li Gan also showed contempt. The 10.5 strong emperors looked at each other and saw the look of disdain in each other's eyes. It is obvious that the half-strong emperors present are also quite familiar with what Li Gan is going to do next. When you turned your heads and looked at Li Ganji again, you could not help shaking your head and sighing. This move again. It seems that Li Gan can escape another robbery today. The thought just flashed in the hearts of the people. Li Gan's face became more and more fierce in the sky. He turned his eyes to Xiaoyang again and said with a cold smile, "I know that your move is powerful enough to kill me directly. I'm afraid your fighting skill has reached the level of human fighting skill. I also admit that I don't have such powerful fighting skill. So, since I want to kill you, I have no choice but to explode myself." Once Li Gan's words came out, Xiaoyang's face changed in an instant. The self-explosion of the semi-imperial strong was really not fun. If he really succeeded in self-explosion, I'm afraid everything within tens of thousands of miles of the wild ancient city will turn into nothingness. Even if these so-called semi-imperialist strongmen want to take this desperate blow, it is difficult to save their lives without paying a high enough price. From this, we can see how terrible the self-explosion of the semi-imperialist strong is. The most important thing for Xiaoyang is that there is still a transmission array to the western regions in the wild ancient city. If the wild ancient city is destroyed, where will he find it? Li Gan is really threatening the whole wild ancient city with Xiaoyang. This video will end here.